Look, job security has certainly changed. I think 20 years ago we were still seeing the job for life mentality, very much so in Japan, where people were graduating, joining a company, and they were staying there right through to retirement. That's certainly changed. I think 10 years ago, 5 to 6 years was probably an average tenure that we were seeing people staying in jobs, and now it's probably more like 2 to 3. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a vicious cycle, because when they first start a job, they typically stay because of loyalty to a boss or a mentor. And when that person actually leaves, that connection actually goes. So, people start to question their loyalty to the company, especially now when we're seeing layoffs and redundancies. People for the last few years have worked very hard, they've put in long hours, and now they're finding that either they haven't received a bonus, or they haven't received a pay rise, or they've been made redundant, or their friends have been made redundant. So people are just questioning their priorities at the moment. I think people are, as they get older and they've got families, and if they're not from Hong Kong, then we've seen a lot of expats actually probably leave Hong Kong and Singapore in the last 6 months. I think Australia was saying that there's been more expats returning to Australia now than ever before in history. But the average tenure, I'd say, now would be 2 to 3 years on a job. Yeah, I think Asia's been less affected to date than the UK and the US, but I think this is starting to change. Typically, Asia runs about 6 months behind the rest of the world. What we're seeing is, China it's hugely reliant on orders from the US and the UK. Those orders are starting to dry up as consumer demand wanes. So we've got this inventory glut that's happening. So until that starts to replenish itself and the orders start coming back in, we're going to see things reasonably quiet out in Asia, but there's no real sign of it picking up this year. All the signs that we're hearing from clients are early 2010 that orders will start coming back in, and as such, that's going to affect the job market, and hopefully companies will start hiring again. As far as roles within those industries, typically revenue generating roles, so more on the sales side, and also cost control. So we find there's always a shortage of good accountants, particularly throughout Asia, and at the moment Mandarin speaking accountants. So there's a real push for controlling companies' costs. So if somebody's got good cost control, accounting experience, and they do speak Mandarin, then there's certainly demand for these type of individuals as well. Yeah, I think Hong Kong is being hit hard from both sides, because we rely on services of trade. We don't actually manufacture anything here in Hong Kong. Instead, we re-export goods through China. We're more of a sourcing hub. So whereas the manufacturing has decreased in China, and as a result the orders have decreased from the West, we're sort of in a stalemate here in Hong Kong. So it's probably been seen at a quicker rate here in Hong Kong than it has the rest of Asia. Like up until Q3 probably last year, there was a lot of hiring going on, and all of a sudden it has just stopped. Singapore was quite strong right up to December, but we've seen January and February have a relatively quiet period. That's to be expected with Chinese New Year being earlier this year, but Singapore also is very much an IT-based and banking centre as well. There's a large contracting market. A lot of back office functions for the banks actually house themselves in Singapore, and a lot of these projects and infrastructure upgrades have been put on hold now. So a lot of the contracting staff are finding themselves out of work and having trouble finding other roles to go into. I think companies are only as strong as the people that are in them, and there's always going to be a demand for top tier individuals regardless of what the economy is doing. In the past it was all about growth and moving into new product lines, and as a result headcounts were increasing. What we're seeing now is people are consolidating and going back to their core businesses, but they still need good people. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies are re-evaluating and looking at their bottom 10% and looking at making sure they've got the right people in the right seats. So they're still coming to us, and they're still after, as I said before, good accountants and good salespeople. And especially Japan's a great market in that it's one of the few markets where English is not the first language. So if there's bilingual Japanese who are maybe studying abroad or have worked overseas, then they're in demand. They'll still find a job. Likewise, here in China and Hong Kong, we're seeing more and more local Hong Kong Chinese deciding to return to this part of the world. Many years ago, it was very difficult to attract them back here. They'd settled in Sydney, New York, London, etc. But these days, times are a little bit tougher. A lot of them are going back to family businesses as well. Obviously, the Asian culture is a lot more close-knit as far as families are concerned, so they're being called back. And they're also seeing it as a growth region, because what the signs we're hearing are that China is going to be the first to pull out of this when it does start to pick up. Now, especially in the mainland, we're seeing less and less mainland Chinese travel. Typically, they used to go overseas and do their shopping, and they'd come to Hong Kong and they'd spend their RMB. I think the travel numbers over the Chinese New Year period, a lot more people stayed domestically, so they're actually spending more locally. So consumption in the mainland actually is increased in January and February.